Executive Director on the board of March of the Living Australia. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here this evening to another of our online events, all related to the two core pillars of our educational mission: learning more about and from the Holocaust and from Israel, to ensure a better understanding of the past and the present in order to create a better future for all. During the past 6 months, our thoughts, minds, hearts, and bodies have been focused and consumed by the tragic scenario that has unfolded and is still raging in Israel, Gaza, and the surrounding areas. And we therefore made a conscious decision late last year to defer all of our, until then, regular webinars and virtual events accordingly. Tonight marks the second event since the resumption of our educational sessions this year, and I hope that it will help us all in seeing some light during this period of seeming darkness. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we work and live, and on which this online event is being hosted today. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. At the outset, I would like to state that March of the Living Australia deems itself as an apolitical entity dedicated to combating intolerance and fighting injustice as a legacy of the Holocaust and our Jewish heritage, strongly advocating for inclusivity, freedom of speech, and respectful dialogue, no matter whether we agree or disagree on the topics and delivery of the messages being conveyed by our presenters. March of the Living Australia neither promotes nor endorses in any way the views of individual presenters, and we call on all attendees to listen to and engage with the presenters and other members of the audience in a respectful and meaningful manner. Before our guest this evening joins us, please allow me to briefly touch on some small housekeeping matters. Tonight's event will take the form of a proverbial fireside chat between our guest, Ben Freeman, and myself, during which everyone, bar the two of us, will be on mute. So I kindly request that you refrain from unmuting yourself until the Q&A session at the end. I call on you to use the chat function at the bottom of your screens to pose any questions, and time permitting, I will raise these on your behalf. Alternatively, I may ask you to pose the question yourself during the Q&A that will follow the initial discussion. And finally, just a reminder that the session will be recorded and will be available on our socials and our website for you to share with others later on if you so wish. So without further ado, a big welcome to Ben. Hi, Ben. It is indeed a pleasure having you join us this Sunday evening or your morning. Yeah. And without doing the whole CV background intro thing, I'll just say that your journey to becoming a published author, blogger, opinion leader, etc., has been both diverse and circuitous. And I will therefore just ask you, if you can, to tell us a little bit about your journey so far, what your professional career has led you through, and what your interests are, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be with you all. I was a Holocaust educator for many years, so this is a particularly important organization for me to be working with, March of the Living. So I am from Scotland. You may be able to hear from my accent. And it is quite soft. I saw someone shaking their head. I do have quite a soft accent, I do promise you that. So I'm from Scotland, and there were 5,000 Jews in Scotland when I was growing up. So I lived in the city of Glasgow, which is where most of the Jews lived. And it was a very small community, and my parents had to work, not just my parents, the parents of my peers had to work incredibly hard to kind of build Jewish identities in us because we were so obviously a minority. And I think that was a really important lesson that we learned, what it meant to be a minority. And it wasn't necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, it just was. We knew that we were different from our non-Jewish friends. They would be having fish and chips on a Friday night, we'd be having Shabbat dinner, they'd be going out with their friends when it was Yom Kippur, we'd be fasting. So we knew that we were different. So I grew up in this very Jewish environment that really instilled this kind of sense of pride and sense of identity in me. But I have to be honest, I didn't really think about it that much. You know, I went to a Jewish elementary school. There's one Jewish school in Scotland, the elementary school I went to, Calderwood Lodge, and everyone in my life was Jewish. So it wasn't really a consideration. And even when I went to high school, which was not Jewish, we just were. It wasn't really something I was kind of actively grappling with. But then in my teens, I kind of came to the realization, or I started coming to the realization that I was also gay. And that led me to think about my identity. It led me to pursue LGBTQ plus pride. You know, I'm 37, I was born in 1987, and the kind of context in which I grew up in was very heavily centered from a gay perspective on the AIDS epidemic. And that really clouded mine and other people's kind of views on what it meant to be gay, what it meant to live as an adult as a gay person. So I had internalized huge amounts of homophobia, huge amounts of shame. And I did the work over a decade. I mean, it took a really long time, but I did the work to kind of dismantle that internal shame, internalized homophobia. And I pursued LGBTQ plus pride. And now I can stand and talk about my identity with complete ease and comfort and pride. And when I started talking about Jewish pride, because that is really my work, you know, I've understood and learned from my experience with LGBTQ plus pride, and I want to offer Jews the same framework to educate, inspire, and empower us, because pride in the LGBTQ plus community has been transformative. It has literally saved people's lives. And I think that if we as Jews harness the power of pride, our lives can also be changed, obviously for the better. So I started kind of considering this relationship, or I started considering pride more generally in about 2018, and I was online and I was fighting Jeremy Corbyn. And let me just remind you who Jeremy Corbyn is in case some of you have forgotten, which would be a wonderful thing if we could forget who he is. So he was the leader of the Labour Party. Her Majesty's Most Loyal Opposition was his official title. So he had a place in the British kind of governing political system. And in my mind, you gave your disclaimer at the beginning, Cedric. In my mind, I can say this. He's a racist. He is a classic British racist, and he doesn't think that Jews, even if we're born in Britain, he doesn't think we're really British, which is kind of an old English classic kind of form of Jew hatred here. I'm in London. And he also is an anti-Zionist. He had absorbed and utilized the Soviet Union's view of Israel and was kind of projecting that into the world. And he was leader for 5 years, from 2015 to 2020. And it was really an extraordinary time. And I think that for many Jews in Britain, it was the catalyst for a real evolution in our identities because there was a betrayal. I was in synagogue with my mum a couple of weeks ago. No, actually, no, but 6 weeks ago. And in Britain, I actually don't know what this is like in Australia. You can nod or shake your head if this is the same. So in Britain, we have a prayer for the royal family. Do you have that in Australia? So you do, right? Okay, so we are making enormous efforts to integrate and to be part of these societies. And, you know, I know the prayer for it was the Queen off by heart because I heard it so much. And it was the Jeremy Corbyn experience was a betrayal. And I think it really elicited a response where Jews began considering their identities. And that's what happened to me. And I started considering my gay identity and the power of gay pride. And I thought, okay, so Jews deserve this just as much as any other people. So I wrote 2 books about it. I'm writing a third right now. And here I am now speaking to you fine people in Australia. It's a very
Fantastic.
abridged version, obviously.
Yeah, no, amazing. So clearly, your journey of discovery of pride in general has almost a duality
Hmm.
for you. And without giving away too much about your books, I think you do cover both areas
Yeah.
of pride. So maybe you can just give us a bit of a sense of how those two overlap, if they do
Hmm.
overlap.
Absolutely. I think they do. And I mean, first of all, we should say that pride is an emotion that any person can feel. So that's why you have LGBTQ plus, black pride, Asian pride. Jewish pride, right? This is not a specifically Jewish conversation. We're approaching it from a Jewish perspective, but it is one which applies to many experiences. And as such, so does the experience of being minoritized, right? So does the experience of being othered. And I think in the LGBTQ plus and Jewish experiences, there's two things that I've identified which really speak to me as a duality. And one is passing, and the other is coming out. And these are not things necessarily that Jews consider. Excuse me, a coffee break. So in terms of coming out, we as Jews, we have to tell people that we're Jewish. And we have to make the choice whether we tell people that we're Jewish. And some of us don't, because we don't necessarily feel safe in that environment. And that's also a similar experience with the LGBTQ plus experience, obviously, and that's kind of an idea we associate with that community, but it also applies to us as Jews. We do have to make that decision. And the thing I find about the Jewish experience is there's so many things happening, but we're not necessarily having a conversation about it. So we're coming out or not coming out, but we're not having a conversation. Whereas the gay community, we come out or not come out, but there is a conversation taking place.
So what
The
is
next,
that? Sorry, sorry
go
for,
ahead.
for jumping in there. I thought there was a break, but it was just a thought bubble break. Um, so if you were to define the difference between LGBTQ plus pride and the Jewish pride, are they different as far as the actual emotion is concerned, or is it a similar concept?
I think it's very similar. I mean, I think it will be rooted in different things. It'll be actioned and expressed differently, but I think it is similar. Yeah, I
Yeah,
think so. I
absolutely.
think so.
All right. So sorry, I totally broke your chain of thought there.
Not at all. And the other section I was going to talk about, so I talk about coming out. The next is passing. A gay person can pass as straight. A Jewish person can pass as not Jewish, which means we're passing, excuse me, as being a member of the majority, which is really significant because that means that we're able to, in a sense, circumvent the hatred that we're experiencing, but we still feel the psychological impact. And I think that again is a conversation that exists in the LGBTQ plus community that we're not having.
Yeah.
How does anti-Semitism impact us? Obviously we talk about the Holocaust, the pogroms, October 7th, we talk about the things that are done to us, but what about on a psychological level? What about on an emotional level? And that is the conversation that is happening in the gay community and others, I believe. And I think that we are kind of generations behind other communities. And I don't say that to shame us. I say it to kind of, I think we understand why that would be. I think that probably so many experiences in the Jewish history have been so awful that we've just had to get on with it. After the Shoah, it was okay, we just have to get on with it. But now we're living in a time where there's an emphasis on mental health. So we have to be having similar conversations because it does impact us. It impacts us in a very real and tangible way. I know that I'm sure I don't speak for just myself when I say the psychological impact on us since October 7th has been great. We've felt it. It's not just this thing that's happening in Israel, it's happening also in our emotional world. And I know that I'm kind of using modern language and modern ideas, but I think that there's something to this. And I think that the LGBTQ plus community and the experience there is an understanding of the impact of homophobia or whatever on the individual. And we're lacking in that area. But I think passing is such an interesting thing because, as I said, it kind of does allow you to kind of circumvent to a certain extent, but it doesn't allow, excuse me, it's not a privilege. As a young person, I suffered internalized homophobia and I did suffer, even though no one was bullying me. It was an internal battle that was taking place. So we have to be kinder. We have to expand the definitions of prejudice, of oppression, of different communities to understand the vastness of it. It's not just minorities don't just experience one type of thing. We experience things in different ways. So our experience as Jews should not be compared to, say, the Black experience because that's distinct and important, but so is ours. And I was just in a position, I guess, being a gay Jew to, I had insight into both of these identities experiences, which allowed me to kind of consider Jewish pride, which is also, by the way, the most obvious thing in the world. It's like, it really is. I don't like, I sometimes feel like I'm doing myself out of a job by saying that, but it's, of course we should like ourselves. Of course we should value ourselves. Of course we should be the ones to define our identities. Those ideas are not, or rather, those ideas should not be radical.
Right. So do you consciously believe that there are elements within the Jewish world, and obviously it's a very diverse world, that actually battle with the concept of Jewish pride? In other words, that there is an active sort of scenario whereby there is this escapism, there is this hiding, there is this trying to avoid being identified or identifying oneself as a Jew?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a pandemic. I think it's taking place all over the Jewish world. And initially, when I started researching, so my first book is about Jewish pride as a kind of blueprint, and my second book is about internalized anti-Semitism. And when I first started writing that book, I really thought that it was like going to be a specific type of Jew, like a secular Jew, maybe a left-wing Jew, really speaking about my own experience. And I realized that it's not. And in the book, I interview Jews from all over the world, including an Australian Jew, actually. And I also interview an Orthodox woman who battled with internalized anti-Semitism. And I think that because we as a community don't talk about it, we're not necessarily equipped with the language ourselves to describe our own experiences or our own battles. But I can describe my experience. So I used to say I'm Jewish, but I used to say I'm Zionist, but. And by the way, I was saying I'm Jewish, but while working for a Jewish organization. And I was saying I'm Zionist, but when my brother was serving in the IDF. And I was proud of being a Jew and I was proud of being a Zionist. But the thing that we have to understand about identity is that it's immensely complicated. And shame and pride can actually coexist at the same time. We kind of think of it in a bit of a binary way, right? To be like, you're either proud or you're ashamed. It's much more complicated than that. I was proud, but I also wanted to be a version of a Jew or a Zionist that would be palatable to my non-Jewish friends. I wanted to be palatable. I wanted to be a good Jew. And I think that is something that Jews all over the world are grappling with. And I don't talk about this again with any judgment. What we have to understand is about the shame, the internalized battle, internalized anti-Semitism. That is a manifestation of prejudice. And the prejudice that we face is not our problem. What do I mean by that? It doesn't begin in our community. It's a non-Jewish problem that impacts us. It's a non-Jewish problem that comes into our community. So what we need to do is build barriers. And I feel very passionate and maybe a little dogmatic about this now. In my old age, I didn't used to be like this. I was much more, diplomatic even a few years ago. But what I say about pride is that I will not even really be prepared to debate its potential. Why? Because I've come not with a theory. We know that pride has changed the lives of LGBTQ plus people all over the world. Australia is at Sydney, right? The Sydney Mardi Gras is one of the biggest events in the world for LGBTQ plus pride. This has transformed the community. And if we allow it, it can also transform our Jewish community. And it will be different. I don't think we're going to have Mardi Gras, right? It'll be different, it'll be Jewish, but it has the same potential, it has the same power. And it's not a theory, it's not a hypothesis. No, I've come with something which works. So we have to do the work. And it is work. I told you that experience of kind of going towards LGBTQ plus pride took me a decade. Now, I think as Jews, maybe it would not take as long for some of us, right? That's fine. Not everyone has to commit to a decade's worth of work. But we have to be having internal dialogue about our Jewish community, about our Jewish identity, about Israel, how we feel about ourselves, how we see ourselves. And then also as a community, which is why this event, which obviously with March of the Living Australia is so important, having a communal conversation. And I'm actually coming to Australia and New Zealand in June. So maybe I'll see you there. I'm speaking at some events in Melbourne, in Sydney, I'm speaking at Lamud. And I'm really privileged because I get to travel the world. and I speak to Jewish communities, and I speak to Jewish communities like in places that I never thought I would visit. And when I talk about my experience, I see people in the audience nodding along because there's a shared experience. This idea of saying, I'm Jewish, but I'm Zionist, but this idea of maybe diminishing your Jewishness, this idea of wanting to be palatable. These are things which so many Jews, I was going to say all Jews, but I pulled it back a bit. So many Jews are dealing with, but we're not having really an established conversation, which is why these events are so important, because the most vital thing to understand is that we're not alone in those thoughts, those questions, those battles, and it's not our fault. Sometimes you can feel shame in shame. So you feel shame about something, and then that makes you feel like you have done something wrong. No, we've done nothing wrong. That is the crux of this. We've done nothing wrong. Jew hatred is not our fault. It is the problem, the poison of the wider world, which has impacted and affected us. And we need to build barriers to say, no, that is your issue. You need to leave it over there. We can't force you to like us, but we need you to leave us alone. And we need not to absorb, because I think that's the biggest tragedy, or one of the biggest tragedies, let's say, of Jew hatred, is that it alters the way we feel about ourselves. And that's an enormous tragedy, because then pride is intergenerational. If you're a really proud Jew, you're going to pass that on to your children. But if you're a Jew with shame, if you're a Jew who has distanced themselves from your Jewishness, what are we passing on to our children? So it also has the potential to be intergenerational. So while it's, we're talking about feelings and ideas, it has a very tangible impact in our community, because ultimately what it does is lead us either towards Jewishness or away from it. And again, in an intergenerational perspective.
So would you say that the Jewish pride in itself as a concept is a form of not only combating anti-Semitism, but possibly also combating assimilation?
Yeah, absolutely, of course. I mean, I think assimilation's our enemy. And that's not to say we don't integrate. I'm British, right? I watched the coronation, waved the little flag, loved it, had a barbecue in the rain. Like, I feel British, love to queue. I went to Harry Potter World yesterday, the studios, with my partner, which was kind of unbelievable. And the person arrived to check everyone's tickets, and we were in a group with very few other British people, and no one was queuing, and I was outraged to my partner because British people love to queue, right? I live in this country. I have been socialized in the way that you're Australian, right? This is just the way it is, which is fine and normal, and has been the way Jews have existed in the diaspora forever. The Jews living in Alexandria, over 2,000 years ago, had a duality of Jewishness and Greekness, which is not a bad thing, actually, inherently. Assimilation is when we're forced to kind of shed our identities. We shed our Jewishness, or we remake it in their eyes. So absolutely. And I will say that, Jewish pride, you touched on this, Cedric, Jewish pride is a form of resistance. When the world wants us to be ashamed, when the world wants us to not support Israel, supporting Israel, lighting Shabbat candles is a form of resistance. However, we're not doing it just because it's a form of resistance. We're doing it because we matter. Jewishness has value, and we want to honor it. We want to feel good about it. We want to express it. So we cannot make the mistake of basing our pride also as a form of resistance, also on non-Jews and the non-Jewish world. And I wonder if you have had this experience, Cedric. When I was a Holocaust educator and I would take trips from Glasgow to Poland to educate young Scottish Jews about the Holocaust, your kind of nightmare as an educator would be if a young person said, "This is why I'm Jewish." No, this is not why we're Jewish. This is something that happened, and it's horrendous and tragic, and we have to remember it, but it's not why we're Jewish. We're Jewish because we're part of something bigger than us. We're part of something greater than us, something that stretches back 3,300 years ago to the Levant, and we're carrying it on because there's value in being Jewish. It's not just in response to the non-Jewish world. But of course, it does help us resist. And absolutely, it helps us stand up and put boundaries in place. So when the world says to us, this is what you need to do to be accepted. We actually can have a moment to say, well, actually, maybe we're not going to do that. I am a monarchist, and I've written a column calling out Prince William for visiting the Red Cross, because integrating does not mean that we do it without self-esteem or we do it without confidence. We have to have those things. It's about we go into the relationship, the integration, as equal partners, or as equal partners as we can be, being a minority. But we still have expectations. We're not just saying, okay, we'll accept you. Thank you so much, Your Majesty. Do whatever you like. No. I expect the monarchy to react to us in a certain way, to treat us in a certain way. And Pride has taught me that. And Pride has given me the permission to say it. And I think that is actually the thing about Jewish Pride and in my work, is that it's permission giving. I do all of these events and people say to me, I've had these thoughts before. And I'm like, yeah, of course you have. Of course we've thought about our identities. Of course we've considered how we view ourselves. But now hopefully we have the language that, and if we do more work, the tools to actualize it and to give ourselves and each other permission, because Pride is catching. If we're proud Jews, then think about the people that we impact.
Yeah. I love the concept that you brought up there because, as you know, we're about to go on March of the Living, and that question that you raised, that nightmare question, is so valuable and so valid that in this context, it is hugely important. It's important to stand up for your Jewishness, for your identity, because that's who you are, not because something happened to you. Yeah,
absolutely. And we have a tendency in the Jewish community, I think, to be really good at coming together in unity and being Zionist and proud when something bad has happened. And I think that is really appalling, actually. It's that I think is unacceptable. We have to be proud and active even when things are good, even when we're being treated well. We cannot just be responding all the time, because that's part of the situation. Our power, I mean, you spoke about this in the video with March the Living, from powerlessness to power. The powerlessness is when we're always also responding. But what about our narrative? What about our story? What about the things that we think are important? What about the conversations we need to have? And listen, I know there are 27 Jews on this call. If we started getting into it about Jewish identity, this call would never end.
not everyone on this call, by the way, Ben, is Jewish.
Okay, well, so you also might be very opinionated, but Jews have a habit of being incredibly opinionated. We say 3 Jews, 15 opinions, but they're our conversations to have. And that's right. That's the reality. Jews love a good debate, but they're our debates to have. We should not be always being impacted and molded and shaped and contorted by the wider world. And October 7th has given us an opportunity. It's a terrible thing to consider, but I think it has. And it's given us a moment to reflect on our identity, our unity, how we relate to Israel, how we relate to each other. I'm from Scotland. None of us have met in person. Hopefully, I'll meet you in June. But we have an instant connection. Those of us in this call, because we're all interested in the same issues, of course. We're like-minded. We're coming together, learning about the Holocaust, learning about these events. But also for those of us in the call who are Jewish, we're actually family. We're actually, literally family. So there is a connection that we need to foster at all times. And I find it really desperately sad that in times like this, post-October 7th, we're so great and we're coming together and billions of dollars are being sent to Israel and we're marching and we're doing all the things. But what happens when the war is over? What happens in 3 years if things are peaceful? I say if things are peaceful. We have to own our identities, own our stories at all times. And I think, and that's something for me as well. And that's what I'll say, Pride is also for me, because I have been in circumstances, even since writing my books, that I reflect on and I think, I wish I'd handled that differently. I wish I'd stood up for myself more. Because to raise your voice, especially when you're a minority, and we're such a tiny minority, so often we're in spaces where we're the only Jew or one of few Jews. And that can be quite an intimidating thing. And we have to have empathy for that. We have to understand it and not beat ourselves up if we think, oh, I didn't respond in the way that I thought I should. I have those conversations and say, okay, next time you'll do better. But it's about working towards something. I mean, I really feel so passionately about the fact that Jewishness does not belong to us. We are caretakers of it for future generations. And the question every generation of Jews has to be asking is, okay, what are we passing on? What are the younger generations or the generations that aren't even born yet? What are they going to inherit from us?
Yep, very good question. So with regards to how to instill that sense of pride, what are the key challenges? In other words, is it something that one can instill,
Yeah.
or is it something that that you know either you've got the flame or you don't have the flame?
I love the way you phrase that question, Cedric, because I talk about a flame inside us as Jews, which doesn't go out. And that's our internal pride. So even if we're not going to show our pride to the world because maybe it's not physically safe, that internal pride does not go out. So I love the way you phrase that. I think it absolutely is something that you can cultivate. And, you know, I know that in this call so far, we've spoken about feelings and ideas, but pride is also something very real and tangible. It's not just a thought, it's not just an idea. And the way I think about it, or the way I think about the practical execution, the practical manifestation of pride would be using what I kind of refer to as the head, the hands, and the heart model. So the head is knowledge. The Jewish people have a real story to be told. And many of us, and I'm not necessarily speaking about anyone in this call, but many of the Jews I speak to around the world do not feel literate in our own story. And at the beginning, Cedric, you did a land acknowledgement for Indigenous people in Australia, which I've also heard happen in Canada. And I don't know if Jews, and I think this is a growing conversation, but I don't know if Jews are talking about this as much as we should be. We're also Indigenous. Obviously not to Australia. We're Indigenous to the Levant, the southern Levant, the land of Israel. And I'm not saying that just by plucking concepts out the air. No, indigeneity is a concept which has criteria and definitions. And I'm actually writing a book about it right now. I'm on break right now because it's the weekend, but I will start again tomorrow. And the definitions or the criteria could have been written about us. I mean, it's truly extraordinary, the connection between Jews and the land. And I mean the land, the dirt. You know, Pesach is coming in a couple of weeks. Pesach started out, we think, as two different separate holidays. One was a harvest festival and one was a sacrifice festival. And at one point, the kind of scholarship is that they came together. But we as Jews, you as Jews living in Australia, me as Jews living in Britain, we're about to still celebrate in a few weeks a harvest festival, even if we're not harvesting. That is kind of the definition of indigeneity. The fact that Hebrew is still the language of the Jewish people, that we pray in it. Some of us on this call may speak it conversationally. The Jewish state still speaks it. That again is a symbol of our indigeneity. And we have to know that story. And I think one of the mistakes that we've made, and obviously when we're moving forward, we're going to reflect on the errors of the past. And again, we're not doing it to judge. We're doing it to kind of critically assess, see what is good, what maybe didn't work so well, and move forward. One of the things I think that didn't work so well is the focus or the lens of religion. I say that Jews are not a religion. We're a people who have a religion. And they're quite different things. Even our God, Hashem, is termed anthropologically as a national god. Like that is what the category of God, our God, fits into. So what does that mean? That it's a god for a specific people in a specific land. So we have to understand the peoplehood element, and that we'll come back to that in a moment. So understanding the story of the Jews, that there was a northern kingdom of Israel, a southern kingdom of Judah. There were the Hasmoneans, there was Judah HaMaccabee. These people really in groups really existed, and that's our story, and we have to tell it. And first we have to know it, then we have to tell it. And I'm not saying that we disregard the Torah. The Torah is, I'm a secular Jew, I'll be totally upfront, but the Torah is still my legal code. That's what I see it as. It's the Jewish constitution, our law books, it is our history books. So we teach these perspectives alongside one another. And I say to people, I'm writing this book, and I say in the book, even if there are elements of the Torah which do not reflect exact historical accuracy, it doesn't matter. Why does it not matter? A, because it's belief, and if people believe it does, then wonderful. But also, even if you're questioning and you don't believe, the fact that scribes in the southern kingdom of Judah about 2,700 years ago were writing these stories meant that they had a perception of themselves as distinct. They were different. To be an Israelite, to be a Jew at that time and today is to be different. We're specific. And by the way, every people are. We're not more or less. We just also are. So it's supremely important. So we have to know our story. The hands is we have to do Jewish. And this is something that I have developed over time. I was raised kosher. The British Jewish community is pretty small C conservative. So I was raised in a kosher home. We had separate cutlery. And then I kind of fell off the wagon hard. I had about a decade of not keeping kosher. And then a couple of years ago, I thought, I'm going to start keeping a semblance of kashrut. Why did I do that? Because at that point, this became my work. I was writing these books, I was speaking, and I thought my only Jewish expression is my work. That's not good enough. That's sad, because there's something wonderful here that can enrich our lives. So kind of over the last couple of years, and including past since October 7th, because it's always a work in progress, I've incorporated Jewish tradition into my life. My partner and I, we light the Shabbat candles, we say Kiddush, we say Hamotzi, and we might then go out to the cinema or get a takeaway. But we're marking Shabbat, and that was really important for me, because to be Jewish is to belong to a civilization, an actual civilization, and a living system. And again, the only way it carries on is if we do it. You can't, I think it's hard. This is another conversation. This will be the sequel call. The idea of being a Jew and doing nothing Jewish. I don't know, that's an interesting thing that we should dissect, because I think it's not that it's not possible, but I don't think it's allowing that individual to access the kind of the well of beauty and knowledge that exists in our civilization, even Kaddish. It's really a remarkable thing, the Jewish mourner ritual. The burial happens very quickly, then you have Shiva, then you have the Sloshim, then you have Kaddish, and then every year on the yard site you have Kaddish. And my father passed away about 7 years ago, and saying yahrzeit saying Kaddish, sorry, on his yahrzeit, it's like a valve is released. It's like a pressure valve, and you cry, and then you put it back, you kind of turn the little stopper, and you can carry on, because we're given this incredible set of traditions and actions which can make our lives more beautiful, easier, richer. And the last point is probably the most challenging, because I will acknowledge that pride is an idea. And it's a feeling, right? It's an emotion. I feel proud. So we have to harness and empower, and we have to kind of spread this feeling, which is challenging. How do I think we should do it? I think the focus is on peoplehood. And again, we're not disregarding the religious practice, but the kind of strange or unique thing perhaps about the Jewish people is that a secular Jew and a religious Jew can do the exact same thing, but for different reasons. So I say Kaddish. And if you know the translation of Kaddish, it's all about God. It's like, God's the best, we're exalting God, yay, God. I'm not thinking about God when I'm saying Kaddish. I'm thinking about my father, and I'm thinking about honoring my father in the way that he honored his father, and that the way that Jews have honored their relatives and loved ones for thousands of years. That's what I'm thinking about, the connection. And there is an unbroken connection which exists between all of us, Jew and non-Jew, because our non-Jewish friends and allies absolutely come along with us for the ride. And there's this unbroken connection that exists between us and the Maccabees and the tribes of Israel. Our name Jew comes from, I know I say that in a particularly abrupt way as a Scottish person. My partner is South African, so he says it much softer. The name Jew our names, our descriptor, our identity as Jews comes from. Oh, I will just ask you to
Whoops.
mute.
Yep.
Um, the our name the word Jew comes from the southern kingdom of Judah, which came from the tribe of Judah or Yehuda. And the word Jewish in Old English, ish used to mean someone coming from a certain place. So Jewish means coming from the place of the Jews, coming from Judah. There is this incredible unbroken connection. This call, by the way, is a miracle. Not just that we managed to get the time difference right, but that we are sitting, you're Jews and our allies in Australia. I'm a Jew, a Scottish Jew who lived in Hong Kong, who now lives in London, and we're having a conversation in 2024 about Jewish identity. That's a miracle. And it is something that we are a part of. It is extraordinary. And I think that sense of peoplehood, that sense of connection, our indigeneity to Israel, the land of Israel, is how we spread, build, develop this feeling. And it changes people's lives. I mean, I feel as a Jew, and I know the phrase as a Jew is kind of a has a specific reference, but as a Jewish person, I will say, my life has been enriched since I started writing these books, since I started considering my identity, since I started putting boundaries in place with my non-Jewish friends. And I say, and I've got wonderful non-Jewish friends and allies, but I say to them, listen, let's if you want to talk about it, absolutely I'll talk about it and I will answer any question you have. But I also will ask you to kind of pay attention to and respect my boundaries. And why do I have boundaries? Because I care more about this than my non-Jewish friends do. You know, my non-Jewish friends care about me and they're thinking people and thoughtful people, so they care about the news. But what's happening in Israel is my family, is my emotion, is my sense of home. It's something that really impacts us. I'm sure that if any of us in this call, any of the Jews in this call have experienced anti-Semitism, you can remember it. These are like slaps in the face that we can recall for years afterwards. So we need to be able to kind of have boundaries and we need to be able to take a little bit of control back. We can't always be at the mercy or the whim of the wider world. We have to also kind of set our own destiny and set our own narrative.
Yeah. So I think those three aspects, I think you've defined them very, very succinctly and very beautifully. So thank you for that. My next question, and probably my final question before I hand over to the audience, and I hope that everybody's got some questions for Ben, is you mentioned this earlier, and I think it's something that the audience totally gets and understands. And it is one of those phenomena that comes out sadly in our sort of milieu, in our the country we sort of very, very connected to, is that at times of hardship,
Mm,
we all come together
mm,
and there's a growing sense of unity and strength and cohesiveness, etc., etc. And the the question I'm going to relate to is, how does one draw the line, or is there a line to be drawn between Jewish pride and Israel pride?
Oh, that is such a good question. So to me, I'm going to be very clear and very upfront. Israel is at the center of Jewish pride. Why? Because it's our indigenous land. That doesn't mean we have to agree with everything the government of the state of Israel does. I'm writing this book, as I've said, and I've got some chapters devoted to Jewish indigeneity, of course, and I've got 4 chapters devoted to Jewish history. And I cover 1300 years in these 4 chapters, so it's kind of a brief overview. And sometimes I'm looking at the leaders in our past and I think, what? I mean, the incompetence is staggering. So I'm able to judge the Hasmoneans, who I think, honestly, were woefully incompetent, or the son of Herod, who he was so incompetent, a rebellion broke out against him, which is what paved the way from direct rule from Rome. So we're able to critique our leaders, we're able to critique policy, absolutely. But I think the idea of Israel, the land of Israel, is at the very center of Jewish pride. And therefore Zionism is too. And I think Zionism really interestingly, all of these concepts for me they kind of are framework switching. Because, I'm a historian, so I've been doing research for a long time, but exploring through the framework, the lens of indigeneity has been fascinating because now I see Zionism as our indigenous rights movement. Just as every community is, including the communities in Australia and New Zealand, everywhere else, will have these movements. Zionism is ours. And it's kind of, and we did it, which I don't know if it's ever happened in history or it's not happened very many times that a people who not only were colonized for literally thousands of years, but who were expelled. And the extraordinary thing is, you see throughout the long history of the Jews, including today, Jews going back home. And it is our home, and we can have many homes. And home, by the way, is also where I am right now. I was in a hotel a couple of weeks ago, so I was like saying to my partner, we were out for a walk. Shall we go home? I don't live at the hotel. It's just the way we speak. You can have multiple homes, but one of our homes, I believe, is Israel. And we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should own it and say, no, we're an indigenous people. How can you expect us to be separated from that land? Jews in Scotland, let me tell you, we pray for rain. We don't need rain in Scotland. We are praying for rain in Israel. The connection is true, and again, it's this framework. So this connection is truly extraordinary. So Israel has to, I really believe, has to be at the center of it. But that doesn't mean we have to sign up, to every policy or agree or not question or not critique, because that also is what we have done for literally thousands of years. We don't need to have blind loyalty. We need to have a relationship with Israel. And I was in Rochester, New York a couple of weeks ago when I was touring the States, and I met this young Israeli, and we had like, as Jews do, you meet each other very briefly, and then you eat, and then you start debating. So we had like a 3-hour debate, and he was coming from an Israeli perspective, and he was asking me about, I said to him, I feel more Jewish than I do British, especially in the last few years. And I will say identity is always in flux. Who knows if that will always be the case? But that's the way I feel now, and I think it's absolutely fine because I'm not disloyal to Britain. It's not like one or the other, it's just kind of shades of grey. But anyway, he couldn't understand how I, as a British person, could say that I felt more British than I felt more Jewish than British because he's Israeli. And I was like, but you have a different experience because you live in the land. There's a wholeness to your identity. Whereas I think for us in the diaspora, there's a little bit of a fracture because we have a tension. And by the way, this is a tension all diasporic people have, not just us. And there was a poem written by a Nigerian poet whose name escapes me right now, but it's called Diaspora Blues. And essentially she writes, too foreign for home, too foreign for here. Because again, I'm British. I would go to Israel and be like, oh my God, can you queue, please? Like, why is your bureaucracy so bad? Come on, people, let's get it together. Because I would come with British sensibilities, but I'm here as a Jew. So we do have this conflict. We do have this tension, which is just inherent and just is. I don't think there's anything really we can do about it. But yeah, Israel has to be central because what is a Jew if we separate us from the land? How can we even call ourselves Jews when the word comes from Judah? It makes no sense. What are we saying at the end of Pesach? L'shana haba Poland? Like, no, of course we're not saying that. L'shana haba Yerushalayim, because that is our home. And ever since we were expelled by the Romans in 136, 135 BCE, we were desperate to go back. And we did go back. There was testimony of rabbis from the 11th, 12th century going back. Maimonides went. And we have to own it. And this is the thing, the non-Jewish world, and I don't mean non-Jews when I say non-Jewish world, I mean the systems that exist in the diaspora. But what is wanted, especially right now, is for us to distance ourselves from Israel. No, we don't agree with that. We don't support that. We're not Zionist. No, we're not going to bend to their will. We're going to know exactly who we are. We're going to understand our connection to the land, and we're going to honor it. And we'll be active participants in the relationship. So if we think Netanyahu, for example, is bad or good or whatever, then we can say that. We don't need to keep our mouth shut. We don't need to be blind. But just as there's things that Britain does that I disagree with, I do still feel British. Same with Israel. We don't need to allow it to kind of break our identity. You can say, okay, I don't agree with that policy. I hope the next government does X, Y, or Z, and still be a proud Zionist, still be working and fighting for the continuation of the state of Israel.
Ben, thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you. I'm going to open up now for questions. I've got two questions. No, I've got more, sorry. And I'm going to ask those people who have submitted questions, if you want to present it yourself, by all means. So, Gabby, would you be happy to present your question, or do you want me to do it?
Hi.
There
Hi,
you
Gavin.
go.
Hi, Ben. I've followed you for a long time. Absolutely love you, and I love Eve also. You're both beautiful, fabulous Scottish Jews.
Thank you. Not very many of
I
us.
I continuously come out as a Jew every day because I'm the operations manager at the Queensland Holocaust Museum. And we only have 5,000 Jews in Queensland. My question is, are you a little bit disheartened, confused? Because I think it's cray-cray, the LGBTQ community coming out so pro-Palestinian.
Yeah.
I'm just the 18 to 29-year-olds. I'm so confused how they've fallen for this propaganda, and
Yeah.
what's going to happen?
I wouldn't say I'm confused. I'd say I'm bloody furious. I think that
Mm,
those people are actually completely reprehensible, not just because they're lying, but because there are LGBTQ plus Palestinians who are living what I can only imagine is a nightmare that we as their, gay, bi, lesbian, trans brothers and sisters around the world should be standing with them. And they're not. And I find that to be truly disgusting. But I understand why it happens, and there is a reason. And it's actually not just regarding the LGBTQ plus community, it's regarding the left in general. And what we saw, and the reason I'm going to tell you this is because I find being able to explain something makes me feel better. It makes me be like, okay, I understand this. I'm not crazy. These people are not right. They've responded to a situation. So the left used to be, before the 1950s or 60s, the left's focus was on international revolution, right? The workers' revolution, bringing back the means of production to the working class, or the ownership of the means of production to the working class. That changed in the 50s and 60s because of decolonization. The decolonization was sweeping Africa, sweeping the world, and that became the focus. And then the world, as a result, was split into oppressed, oppressor, freedom fighter, or oppressor, let's say again. And that was a binary that existed. And we've seen for a long time groups in the left who we would assume would stand with minorities, including, and women are not a minority numerically, but are treated as such, so including women around the world. But instead of standing with those groups, the minoritized communities, they're standing with the oppressors because the oppressors are deemed to be freedom fighters. So you see it in situations, particularly within the African continent, right? There's laws against LGBTQ plus people, there's laws against women, there's female genital mutilation, things that go on, which are objectively terrible, right? And I think again, this is my view, not the view of March for Loving Australia, but I think we have to move away from this idea that, oh, there's cultural differences. Of course, there's cultural differences, but there are some things which are wrong and some things which are right. And killing people and physically harming people is wrong. It's just the way it is. But because of this binary which exists, these groups in the left have joined with the oppressor because they're deemed as freedom fighters against colonialists. So that's what we're seeing with the Palestinians. The Palestinians are seen as the oppressed. They're seen as fighting, Hamas is termed freedom fighters, which is absolutely kind of mind-boggling. Even the phrase rape is not resistance is something we have to say because they're in this wider binary, they're termed to be the freedom fighters. So therefore, in this binary, they're not able to be persecuting people. They're not able to be, theocratic or oppressive or misogynistic or Jew-hating or LGBTQ plus phobic. They are freedom fighters. But those people I find to be truly, I find them to be reprehensible. And act like they make my blood boil because you're just leaving these poor people to the dogs. And it's not, again, we're not talking about theory here. We know there have been very well documented instances where LGBTQ plus people have been murdered by the Palestinians in Yemen. And we had people on the streets of London praising the Houthis. Just last week or just a couple of weeks ago, they sentenced 21, I think it was gay men, but excuse me if that's not the correct descriptor for these individuals. They sentenced 21 people, 9 of which I believe were sentenced to death through crucifixion. Where are these people? Where are the people who are marching every bloody weekend in the streets of London or Sydney or Melbourne or wherever? Where are they? And it's because ultimately they don't actually care. They have a very narrow view of the world. It's very much black or white. And anything which deviates from that or which contradicts that, they can't cope with. But there's no excuse for that. I mean, right now there's 12 or however many people sitting in a prison in Yemen, and there's 9 people who may be executed. No, it's like, this is wrong. And we should not be afraid to call out things which are wrong. And it's so interesting seeing the world right now, because I think so many people are having conversations privately, either internally with their partners, with their friends, but are afraid to voice their perspectives because we live in a time of populism, where if you say X, Y, or Z, then you're this, you're that. No, we have to have dialogue, and we have to be able to critique practices which are, again, objectively harmful. But yeah, those queers for Palestine, some people say they're chickens for KFC. I mean, but I honestly think it's like, they're truly reprehensible. And the kind of frustrating thing is, I mean, you mentioned Eve. There's quite a lot of, in my cohort of kind of young-ish, I'm not that young, but young-ish, Jewish advocates, especially those of us online, it's disproportionately, the number of LGBTQ plus Jews is disproportionate. There's so many of us. It's kind of a bit strange. Like, we don't really understand why or how this has happened, but it has. So here we are able to live in our LGBTQ plus identity and our proud Jewishness and of course our Zionism. So it's absolutely maddening to see these people kind of use their gayness or their transness or their biness to demonize Israel. But yeah, I mean, they're absolutely reprehensible. I mean, those are the people who they're done in my books. I'm like, you don't get to do this and then come back and be like, oh, sorry. It's like, no.
Thank you. I'm going to move to a question. Amy, would you like to present your question, or do you want me to read it out?
I'm happy to present it. I'll take off the cap as well on my screen.
That'll be good.
If that's going to work. No, it's not working for me. I don't know if my internet's a bit funky right now. But my question was, you mentioned at the beginning that you experienced internalized battles, whether that be in relation to being gay or whether that be in relation to being Jewish. Was there a defining point where you felt like that shifted? Was it through engagement through community, or was it something that you discovered and worked through by yourself?
So I think it was both, and I think it depends on which experience. So with regards to my LGBTQ plus identity or my gay identity, I remember being a teenager upstairs in the bathroom in my parents' house, and I was going through a particularly kind of bad bout of mental health because, again, as I spoke about, I was experiencing internalized homophobia. And in that moment, and I don't know where this realization came from. I guess it came from the innate understanding that we all have value as individuals. But I understood in that moment, I had the realization that I had done nothing wrong. Because before that, I felt ashamed. I felt like I'd done something wrong and that I was broken and there was something wrong with me. And then I was like, no, I'm fine. It's the world which is screwed up. Like, I'm not doing it. I'm like a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old. I'm not doing anything to harm anyone. So that was really what propelled me again over like a decade plus to pride with regards to the LGBTQ plus community. And the Jewish experience was Corbyn, because I hadn't really necessarily given my identity. It's not that I hadn't thought about it, but I hadn't thought about it in this way. And I was a proud Zionist and I was working for a Jewish organization and Jewishness was a big part of my life. But it was that moment where I really saw, to be honest, I saw high profile, often left-wing Jews who were not able to call Corbyn out, who were still saying just before the election in 2019, so years after this story started, we should still vote for Corbyn. And I thought,
Right.
you can't even say it. You can't say the words. And I thought, okay, why, right? I can be angry at this person, and you can still be angry, but why? I wanted to understand why. And I was like, oh, I think, not to psychoanalyze this person, and I'm not a psychologist, but based on my own experiences, I was like, oh, I think this person has internalized anti-Semitism, and it doesn't mean that they hate themselves. It means that they have absorbed ideas about how to stand up for Jews, or how to prioritize your Jewishness. And this is a pattern we've seen for thousands of years. I mean, in 1934, there was a German Jewish group who basically said, Hitler's not good for us, but our priority is the fatherland. Again, we're not judging them. We understand the pressure to conform, the pressure to be accepted, and that is actually what we're trying to break out of. But I think those are the realizations that I had, which really, in a sense, changed my life, because the realization as a 17-year-old led me towards gay pride, and then that realization on Twitter led me towards Jewish pride, which is now my work. It's what I do. It's a Sunday morning, and I'm speaking to all of you lovely people in Australia, and I wouldn't be doing that if it wasn't for that kind of thought process.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Ben. We're going to conclude. Adam, you wrote a comment. Would you like to
We can have
express that
Adam's
comment?
question.
Hi, Cedric. Hi, all. Sorry for being in the dark. I'm in the car, actually. Ben, thank you very much for what is a very compelling and cogent presentation tonight. I'm Lebanese, I'm Christian, and I'm a fervent admirer of Jewish culture.
Thank you.
I feel I'm a big believer in Western values. I'm grateful to live in Australia, a country with democracy, freedom of speech. I'm shocked, like you, that some of the things that happen, you mentioned with the Houthis, to imprison 20 people for their sexuality and condemn 9 of them to brutal death warrants the most severe condemnation.
You would think.
If we truly believe in our values, that should warrant the most severe condemnation. And it's bizarre, the silence from the left on these sorts of issues, and I think they've lost their moral compass. Not all of the left, of course, it's just one section of it. So thank you for what is a very compelling and lucid position. Just on your thesis, I totally agree with it that a strong, proud Jewish community is actually really good for democracy, great for freedom. So, forgive me. So the question for you is, what practical measures does your book advocate, or perhaps you can speak to tonight, that a Jewish community, which is often a small minority in many countries, what can that community practically do to encourage, foster, and increase that sense of pride?
So thank you. I totally agree with you. And in your question, it's kind of insane, because it feels like we've gone through the looking glass, because the West is based on Christianity, and Christianity came from Jews. So it's like, you can't, like, what are you talking about? Like, it's mad. It's absolutely insane what we're seeing right now. And I believe, and living in Europe, I think the European values are in danger, and the West is very much in danger, and is not understanding that you have to defend liberal values. You have to have an element of a liberalism in a liberal society, because you have to have intolerance to intolerance. But Europe, I think, has taken it to the nth degree anyway. So for me, it's education empowerment. So education is teaching from kindergarten or nursery school all the way through to, and obviously I'm speaking about in a Jewish institution, but in a Jewish high school, but in even a cheder, a Sunday school, or different organizations, multi-generational education. And obviously you start off with little kids or young people at age appropriate. You're not necessarily diving into the concept of indigeneity, but you can have those conversations about peoplehood and the connection, and you foster that, and you educate, and you build on knowledge. I was a teacher, and you build on knowledge over years, right? That is what we have to do, and it has to be something that we have to commit to, and to be quite honest, something we have to commit money to. like we do, we have to pay for this. We have to make sure that this is our priority. And I always say, every organization who is committed to the continuation of the Jewish people, and not every organization is, remember, right? There's some organizations which have very specific remits, but there's also organizations in general which are, you know, that's their remit. For them, yeah, they have to be doing this, and if they're not, then they're failing. There's no more important work than education and empowerment. So the education is this layered education, speaking about it from a historical, archaeological perspective alongside the kind of religious narrative, the Torah narrative. And then with regards to empowerment, we need to enable Jews, all Jews, to understand that Jewishness belongs to them. And I can speak as a secular Jew. I think sometimes secular Jews give things away. We've given things away to the Orthodox, you know, because they practice it, so therefore they get to do it and they can talk about it and we'll just be over here. No, it's also ours. You know, I wear these two Magen David necklaces. If I've done my hair's very long and I need a haircut, so that's why I'm wearing a cap. But I wear a kippah. And people sometimes say to me, why do you wear a kippah? And it's like, well, because I'm a Jewish man. That's why I wear a kippah. And I have just as much a right to wear it as someone who's going to shul or someone who's more Orthodox. So we need to give people permission to claim it and to do it, as I said earlier, with the hands and to feel the empowerment, to feel the connection. This is, that is the hard bit, right? The education, actually, listen, I was a teacher. I could write this curriculum in a day. It's not hard, actually. The empowerment is hard because we're fostering a feeling. But again, it has to be something that we work at from when they're little babies right the way through. In every sermon, in every organization, we're reinforcing this message that we are an amazing civilization. We've done nothing to deserve the treatment that we have received and that we have value. And to be Jewish is wonderful. And it should be something that we're able to say, you know, I'm Jewish and I'm proud of being Jewish. But that is something we build over time. It's not something which happens tomorrow. Like my journey with LGBTQ plus pride, that took time. But we have to, get on with it because time's a ticking.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben. Look,
Thank you.
clearly this discussion could have carried on for much longer, but all good things do come to an end.
Yes.
And on behalf of everyone here, I'd just like to thank you, Ben, profusely for sharing with us some amazing insights and for raising some very pertinent questions and further food for thought. I sincerely hope that this discussion will serve as a talking point amongst all of those who share the hope that peace and tranquility in the region will reign eventually, and that everyone in this audience strives to make the world a better place for us all. Before bringing the evening to a close, I thought that I'd just mention that prior to the commencement of our annual March of the Living journey to Poland and Israel this year, of whom some of the members of the audience are coming with me on this journey, and that is wonderful. So this is going ahead very soon, despite and possibly more importantly, because of the current situation. We have one more incredibly exciting educational event scheduled for 2 weeks' time on Sunday, the 21st of April, this time in the morning. So all those who want to attend, please pay attention, where we will hear from an American concert pianist and Grammy nominee, Mona Golombek, author and star of the internationally acclaimed The Children of Willesden Lane, which focuses on the story of her mother, Lisa Dürer, a child piano prodigy born in Vienna, Austria, who escaped to England as a refugee in 1938 as part of the Kindertransport rescue operation, and about her father, Michel Golombek, who was a French resistance fighter who received the Croix de Guerre. Please, everyone, follow us on social media and via our newsletter and website to register for this event. Thank you all so much. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Ben, thank you. Here's wishing you all a happy, memorable, and meaningful Passover in the hope for a swift, just, and long-standing end to the current conflict. And hopefully this event will have opened up a few bubbles and messages and thoughts for everyone. And we hope to see you at our future events. Thank you all so much, and have a wonderful evening and wonderful afternoon, Ben.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Cedric, for an amazing session.
Thank you.
Good night.